Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session on navigating NIH's updated public access policy requirements. My name is Anna Sackman, and I'm the Data Services Librarian here at UC Berkeley. And today I'm joined by my colleagues Elliot Smith, the Biology and Bioinformatics Librarian, and Tim Vollmer, the Scholarly Communication and Copyright Librarian. We want to start out by acknowledging that this is a really hard time for everyone whose research is funded by the federal government. And for many of you and your colleagues, learning about the new NIH Public Access Policy is perhaps the last thing on your minds. We appreciate all of you taking the time to learn about this today, and we're here to support you as you navigate all of these changes. As you already know, we are recording the presentation portion today to share so that we can share it with others later on, but we will not be recording the Q&A. And do please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. We'll either answer in the chat as we can, or we will return to the questions at the end. So here's a bit of an overview of what we'll cover today. First, we're going to do a little bit of a rewind and explain the 2022 Public Access Policy memo from the Office of Science and Technology Policy, just to provide a little bit of context. Then we'll discuss the NIH Public Access Policy and how the policy and its new timeline will impact manuscripts, the manuscript submission process, and data publication and sharing. We will also talk about what support the library can provide with regard to researchers and departments, understanding the updated public access policy, and we'll also touch on some aspects that are better supported by other units on campus. And then we'll have time for general question and answer at the end. And we have compiled a list of additional resources and links for your future reference. So about 3 years ago, in August 2022, under the Biden administration, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, announced an update to their public access policy. And Alondra Nelson, pictured here, issued the memo. She was then the head of OSTP, and the communication was called Ensuring Free, Immediate, and Equitable Access to Federally Funded Research. Now, the updated policy affects all federal agencies with extramural research and development budgets. So the ones that we're all familiar with, including National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, and many others, including some of the smaller agencies like the U.S. Geological Survey, Endowment of Humanities, and a couple of more. The previous federal policy permitted up to 1 year of an embargo period before researchers needed to deposit a copy of articles in a repository. But the Nelson memo said that peer-reviewed manuscripts that arise from federal funding must be deposited into an agency-designated repository immediately upon acceptance in a scholarly journal and made freely available upon publication with no embargo period. It also requires immediate access to the research data associated with those peer-reviewed articles to be shared at the time of publication. The agencies have finalized all of their public access plans, and most of the updated agency policies go into effect either at the end of this year or on January 1st, 2026. And of course, the topic for today is the NIH Public Access Plan implementation, which has been moved up from December 31st, 2025 to July 1st, 2025, just here in a couple of weeks. So now I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Elliot Smith, who will discuss the change to manuscript submissions. Over to you, Elliot.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that introduction and background. I'm going to talk in my section in more detail about the requirements of the NIH Public Access Policy. And the first requirement is manuscript submission. On acceptance by a journal, as Anna mentioned, an article's author-accepted manuscript must be submitted to PMC via the NIH Manuscript Submission System. PMC, or PubMed Central, is the free full-text repository managed by the National Library of Medicine. This requirement applies to any author-accepted manuscript funded by NIH in whole or part, whether or not the NIH-funded PI is an author. As Anna mentioned, this policy applies to NIH-funded articles accepted on or after July 1st of this year. There is a definition of the author-accepted manuscript in the NIH Public Access Policy, and it is the author's final version that has been accepted for journal publication and includes all revisions resulting from the peer review process. This includes all the files associated with the peer-reviewed manuscript and called out in the text, such as a title page with author and affiliation information, the main text of the manuscript, all references, figures, and tables if they are not embedded in the manuscript, videos, appendices, supplementary files, all the things that were submitted to the journal in essence. The NIH manuscript submission system supports many file types, including the output of many word processing programs, the Microsoft Office suite, PDFs, and more. Images should be high resolution and publication ready. A key change in the 2024 NIH Public Access Policy in comparison to the 2008 policy is that, as Anna mentioned, there's no embargo of 6 months or a year after publication. The author-accepted manuscript will be made available on PMC on the official date of publication. The official date of publication is the date on which the final edited version of the article is first made available by the publisher in print or electronic format, whether or not the article has been collated into a designated issue or volume of the journal. So an EPUB in advance of print would seem to count as publication. I'm going to talk a bit about the submission process because I'm assuming that many researchers have never submitted a manuscript through the NIH manuscript submission system, and also because the process includes multiple steps. Initial submission is done through the NIH MS portal, and for NIH-funded papers requires an ERA Commons account. Login can be a login.gov account or a federated UC Berkeley or LBNL account in which you use your UC or LBNL authentication to sign into NIH Web Services. You want to avoid creating multiple NIH MS accounts. And on this slide, I've linked to the NIH MS login routes. Please take a look at those to make sure that you don't duplicate your account. If you've already logged into NIH MS at some point in the past, but don't remember how, right on the first login page, you can request an email reminder, and they will send you login instructions. Because so many steps are involved, NIH MS lists 6 for the simplest possible scenario. The process requires 2 or 3 weeks when NIH is fully staffed. I would recommend getting started as soon as the final manuscript is accepted. Here's a graphic from the NIH MS website outlining the process. First, the author-accepted manuscript and all associated files are submitted through the NIH MS portal. Initial submission can be done by anyone the author or PI authorizes to do so. The person designated has to have access to copies of the author-accepted manuscript and all associated files, of course, and have or create an ERA Commons login. So a lab administrator or manager, the corresponding author, or the PI themselves can submit the manuscript. However, if someone other than the PI or author submits the manuscript, they should designate the PI or author as the reviewer. The reviewer will approve the final versions of the article and accompanying files to be posted on PMC. In step 2, the reviewer is notified of the submission by email, and the reviewer then needs to log into the system to confirm or add associated funding to the manuscript, review the submission, and approve it for processing by signing a submission statement. In step 3, once the submission is approved by the reviewer, NIH MS converts the submitted documents into PMC-ready documents by applying PMC's archival XML schema and generating HTML and PDF versions. The reviewer is notified when the PMC-ready documents are available for review. In step 4, the reviewer then reviews the PMC-ready documents and either requests corrections or gives final approval. This step can be repeated one or more times until final approval is given. In step 5, after final approval, a persistent PMC ID is assigned to the author-accepted manuscript. And in the final step, the author-accepted manuscript is made available on PMC on the official date of publication. On the next slide, I link to some NIH MS resources that are helpful in understanding the process, interpreting NIH MS notifications, and identifying actions required. These links are also on the Public Access Policy resource page that Anna mentioned, and that will be linked from the final slide of this presentation. On the next slide, I mention a second requirement of the Public Access Policy, and that is that all award recipients must acknowledge NIH funding in any associated publications or documents. The acknowledgement must identify the name of the NIH Institute Center or office and specify the grant number. A disclaimer must also be included. The content is solely the responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of the National Institutes of Health. And now I'll turn it over to Tim Vollmer to cover the important effects the NIH Public Access Policy has on author rights and licensing.
Thanks so much, Elliot. So I'm going to talk briefly about the legal mechanisms that enable the public access policy. So upon accepting NIH funding, recipients grant to NIH the right to make their author-accepted manuscripts resulting from funding publicly available in PubMed Central upon the official date of publication. And you'll see the language here right on the slide, which says, I hereby grant to NIH a royalty-free, non-exclusive, and irrevocable right to reproduce, publish, or otherwise use this work for federal purposes and to authorize others to do so. This grant of rights includes the right to make the final, peer-reviewed manuscript publicly available in PubMed Central upon the official date of publication. So as an author, you might be asked to recertify that you agreed to this government use license during the PubMed Central submission process. And this language is what gives NIH the right to make your author-accepted manuscripts available immediately upon publication in fulfillment of the OSTP policy we outlined at the beginning of the presentation. So NIH encourages but does not require that authors indicate in their submitted manuscript that if it is accepted, NIH has a license to make the accepted manuscript publicly available on the official date of publication. And an example statement might be what we've put on the slide here. And this is suggested text directly taken from the supplemental guidance provided by NIH. So it says, this manuscript is the result of funding in whole or in part by the National Institutes of Health, NIH. It is subject to the NIH Public Access Policy. Through acceptance of this federal funding, NIH has been given a right to make this manuscript publicly available in PubMed Central upon the official date of publication as defined by NIH. So essentially, this text helps to put the publisher on notice that the article, if it's accepted for publication, is going to be subject to the NIH Public Access Policy. It communicates that the policy requires immediate deposit of the author-accepted manuscript at acceptance, and that it will be made publicly available simultaneously when the article is formally published. We'll share a roundup of links at the end of the presentation, and the supplemental guidance document includes this text for you to consider using. Now I want to talk about another piece of supplemental guidance that NIH has released regarding publication costs. So the NIH has reiterated that compliance with the updated public access policy is free, as was the case with the earlier 2008 policy. So say you're publishing in a subscription or paywall journal. You have your NIH-funded article accepted for publication, and you then deposit the author-accepted manuscript into PubMed Central upon acceptance. Then, when the article is published in the journal, the author-accepted manuscript is made publicly available on PubMed Central. But as you may know, some peer-reviewed publishing routes can result in publication costs for article authors, particularly for fully open access journals. And some of these journals require the payment of an article processing charge, or APC. Publication costs such as APCs are allowable in grant applications when they align with the NIH cost principles. And again, we'll provide a link to this guidance in the handout that we'll share at the end. So in this supplemental guidance, NIH has outlined several specific examples of unallowable publishing costs. For example, one type of unallowable cost is for publisher fees, which are charged for the sole purpose of submitting the author-accepted manuscript to PubMed Central. So essentially, you can't use grant funds to pay to deposit the author-accepted manuscript to PubMed Central in the case that there's a publisher that wants to charge for that. There's a short list of other unallowable costs, including costs for services for which there is no resulting publicly available product, and also costs incurred after the closeout of the award. So why are we bringing up publication costs? As I mentioned, the reality is that many fully open access journals are requiring article processing charges, and these APCs can range from a few hundred to several $1,000s. So you could contemplate building in allowable open access publishing fees into your NIH grant applications if you're not already doing so. And the University of California has also been entering into system-wide open access publishing agreements with publishers. And this can help cover some of these fees, particularly for researchers without access to grant funds. These agreements grant access to the UC community to all or most of the journal content. So basically the same reading access to all of the journal subscriptions that we've already been licensing for use by faculty, researchers, and students. But these agreements, which are sometimes called transformative open access publishing agreements, also provides for free or discounted open access publishing for the corresponding authors who are affiliated with UC. So if you're an NIH grantee and have an article accepted for publication in an Elsevier journal, then you can publish it open access and the UC will pay some or all of the article processing charge. But if you don't want to publish it open access under the terms of the UC Elsevier agreement, that's your choice. But remember, under this updated NIH Public Access Policy, you always have to make sure that your author-accepted manuscript is deposited to PubMed Central at the time of acceptance, and know that it will be made publicly available in the PubMed repository on the official date of publication. One other thing, up until now, some publishers have agreed to deposit the final published article, particularly in cases where authors are paying an APC to make the article fully open access on the journal website. But it's unclear whether publishers are going to continue to do this. Some journals may offer to submit on behalf of the author, as they did to help their authors fulfill the conditions of the earlier 2008 Public Access Policy. But really, to ensure that you're in compliance with the NIH's updated policy, it's a good practice for you, the author, to be submitting your author-accepted manuscript to PubMed Central at the time of the acceptance. So that way you can be sure that you're in alignment with the new policy. So you might also be wondering, how does the NIH's updated public access policy intersect with the University of California open access policy? Now, we realize that UC authors are being asked to do a lot with regard to compliance, but hopefully there are some things you can do to make it easier. So since 2013, the University of California has had in place an open access policy that was approved by the Faculty Senate. And in 2015, the open access policy was extended to all UC employees who write scholarly articles, including non-Senate researchers, lecturers, postdocs, librarians, and also graduate students. And the UC's open access policy says that when you publish, you have the right to deposit your author-accepted manuscript into a repository such as eScholarship. You get a notification from the UC's publication management system to claim and upload your author-accepted manuscripts. Now, in the case of an NIH-funded researcher, since you've already deposited your author-accepted manuscript in PubMed Central, there's one feature of the UC system where you can take the URL of your deposited PubMed Central article and just copy and paste it into the UC's system. This makes it at least a little bit easier for you, so you won't have to deposit in multiple locations. So when you're logged into the UC's publication management system, look for the Add Open Access Location tab in the deposit screen, which you can see on the slide right here. And then immediately below, there's a field for Add Open Access Location. So you take the URL of your article as deposited in PubMed Central and then copy it here. I'm going to pass it over now to Anna, who's going to talk about NIH's existing data sharing policies. Anna?
Thanks, Tim. So the NIH data management and sharing policy went into effect just a little over 2 years ago in January 2023. This policy impacts scientific data, which is defined by the NIH as the recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community as of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings. And this is regardless of whether the data are used to support scholarly publications. Scientific data does not include things like laboratory notebooks, a preliminary analysis, drafts of scientific papers, plans for future research, peer reviews, or communications with colleagues. And I can link to the extended list here of what it does not include. The focus of the data management sharing policy is the requirement of a data management and sharing plan, which is a document submitted as part of the grant application. And some of you may have already done this as part of your work. The document is usually about 2 pages, and it requires the applicant to plan in advance how they will be managing and sharing research data that is generated either in whole or in part of the NIH grant. Now, in contrast to the NIH Public Access Policy, which requires immediate deposit of a manuscript on the publication date without embargo, the data management sharing policy states that scientific data should be made accessible as soon as possible and no later than the time of an associated publication or the end of the performance period, whichever comes first. The data management and sharing plan consists of 6 elements, which I have listed in this slide. They want to know about your data types, so the types and amount of data that will be expected to be generated during the project. They want to know about related tools, any software or code that you generate, anything that's needed to access or manipulate the data and provide details about how these tools or software can be accessed. Any data standards that you might be using. So this could include well-defined formats, schemas, vocabularies, or ontologies in the description and organization of the data. But this really depends on the type of data that you have. They'll also be asking about data preservation. Where will you be archiving the data? And then access, distribution, and oversight. So this is a section that addresses any privacy, security, or proprietary issues that may impact access, distribution, or reuse. They also want to know about oversight, and this is a description of how the plan will be monitored and managed, and by whom it will be monitored and managed. The data management sharing policy acknowledges that not all data can receive the same treatment. So, for example, data derived from human participants will need much greater levels of protection and oversight. Staying in compliance depends really on the NIH Institute, Center, or office, and it's possible that the plan will be reviewed during annual research performance progress reports. And allowable costs can be addressed through an additional half page that includes a justification and dollar amount. This might be funding for archiving or for curation. The library provides support in a few different ways. Each department has a library liaison who can get you pointed in the right direction. So for example, Elliot here today, and we are very happy to direct you to the liaison for your department. You can also familiarize yourselves with the programs in the library and with the tools that we support. So for example, we have Scholarly Communication and Information Policy, the office that Tim is in, and they support researchers who are navigating copyright, intellectual property, scholarly publishing, including open access and funding, and tracking scholarly impact. They are really the campus experts on UC's open access policy. And then we also have the RDM program, Research Data Management Program, and the Library Data Services Program. And these are excellent resources for helping researchers select platforms, tools, and assessing storage options for data once it's either received or as it's being generated. We also help researchers with writing their data management plans through the DMP tool and selecting the appropriate repository for sharing and publishing data at the end of the project. We have some campus support that we'd like to direct your attention to. There is the Research Administration and Compliance Office. They facilitate and ensure campus compliance with all research regulations. This includes the Institutional Review Board, IRB, and the Sponsored Projects Office, SPO. And SPO reviews and authorizes proposals for submission. More information about the grant submission pipeline at UC Berkeley can be found at their website, spo.berkeley.edu. And I'm going to put that link into the chat, and I will turn it back over to Tim.
Thanks, Anna. So we just want to provide a few key takeaways from the information that we shared today. So first, if you're an NIH grantee, for all publications you have accepted for beginning July 1st, you'll need to submit your author-accepted manuscript to PubMed Central, and the author-accepted manuscript will be made publicly available at the same time at publication. Second, you should consider including NIH's recommended text on new manuscript submissions to journals. Remember, this is the text that states that your article is subject to the NIH Public Access Policy and that the NIH retains the right to make the manuscript publicly available in PubMed Central upon the official date of publication. This helps educate publishers about the effects of the policy. Third, you should continue to follow the existing 2023 NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy, which covers how to address data arising from NIH-funded research. And then finally, the library and campus units, such as the Sponsored Projects Office, are here to help. So please reach out to us for support as needed. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and we'll share some links in the chat, and we can also open it up for questions and discussions. Thanks, everyone.